Ryan stared at me like the floor beneath him had shifted. I could see the confusion building behind his eyes as Dr. Benjamin Hayes continued looking at me with something close to disbelief. Around us, nurses slowed their steps. A young resident standing beside the nurse station quietly whispered, "Professor Whitmore?" as though the name carried weight inside those hospital walls. I tightened my grip on the paper bag in my hands. "It has been a long time, Benjamin," I said softly. Hearing me say his first name seemed to unsettle Ryan even more. Dr. Hayes let out a quiet breath and shook his head slowly. "I searched for your publications for years after you disappeared from Boston Memorial," he said. "Half the pediatric neurology department still studies your diagnostic methods." Claire blinked twice. "I think there must be some mistake," she interrupted carefully. "Margaret has never worked at a hospital." Her voice carried that same polished certainty she always used during charity dinners and neighborhood gatherings. The certainty of someone who believed she already understood everybody in the room. Dr. Hayes turned toward her politely. "Mrs. Whitmore practically rewrote early childhood neuroresponse protocols in the 1980s, he said. "I was one of her students during my residency." Silence spread between us. Ryan gave a short laugh under his breath, but there was no humor in it. "My mother stayed home raising me," he said quickly. "She was a housewife." I looked down at the soup container warming my hands. Funny how easily a lifetime could be reduced to a single word. Housewife. As though all the years before motherhood had simply vanished. Dr. Hayes studied Ryan carefully before speaking again. "Your mother was one of the most respected specialists I ever met." Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in years, my son looked uncertain around me. Noah's monitor suddenly beeped louder from inside the room, snapping everyone back to reality. A nurse hurried inside while another doctor reviewed the chart at the foot of the bed. Ryan immediately turned toward the glass window, anxiety replacing confusion. "What is happening?" he asked. Dr. Hayes glanced toward the room, his expression tightening. "His heart rate is fluctuating again," he said quietly. "We are still trying to identify the trigger." Without thinking, I stepped closer to the chart the younger doctor had left behind on the counter near the door. Years pass strangely. Some memories disappear forever, but others remain buried beneath your skin like instinct. My eyes moved across the numbers automatically. Blood pressure. Sodium levels. Neuroresponse irregularities. Then I noticed it. A tiny inconsistency hidden between the medication notes and symptom timeline. "Did anyone test for autonomic inflammatory response syndrome?" I asked softly. The young resident frowned immediately. "That condition is extremely rare," he replied. "And honestly, his symptoms do not fully match." I nodded once. "Not fully," I agreed. "Because the neurological tremors appeared before the cardiac irregularities. That reverses the normal progression." The resident stared at me blankly. Dr. Hayes suddenly stepped forward. "What did you say?" he asked sharply. I repeated the observation calmly. His face changed instantly. He grabbed the chart from the counter and scanned the notes, faster this time. "My God," he whispered. "We missed the sequence." Ryan looked between us, completely lost now. "What is happening?" he demanded. Dr. Hayes turned toward the medical team gathering nearby. "Run the inflammatory neuro panel immediately," he ordered. "Now." Nurses moved quickly down the hallway. The energy around us shifted all at once. Claire folded her arms tighter across her chest, her polished confidence beginning to crack. Ryan looked at me again, but differently this time. Not with dismissal. Not with pity. With uncertainty. And standing there beneath those cold hospital lights, I realized something else. People only call your sacrifices simple when they never bothered to learn what they cost you. The hallway outside Noah's room became strangely crowded after Dr. Hayes ordered the additional tests. Nurses moved quickly between stations carrying clipboards and medication trays while the younger resident who had dismissed my observation earlier avoided looking directly at me. Ryan stood near the vending machines with both hands on his hips, staring at the floor like he was trying to solve a puzzle that suddenly no longer made sense. Claire remained beside him, but I noticed something had changed in the way she held herself around me. The casual confidence was gone. In its place sat a careful silence. Dr. Hayes returned nearly 20 minutes later carrying several printed lab sheets. His expression looked tense, but focused. "You were right," he said quietly as he approached me. "The inflammatory markers are elevated exactly where you predicted." Ryan immediately stepped closer. "What does that mean?" he asked. Dr. Hayes glanced toward Noah's room before answering. "It means your mother may have recognized the condition before the rest of us did." Ryan shook his head once like the sentence itself sounded impossible. "No offense, doctor, but you are talking about my mother like she is some kind of medical genius." Dr. Hayes did not smile. "Your mother trained some of the finest pediatric specialists in the country," he replied calmly. "Including me." The words settled heavily into the silence around us. Claire crossed her arms slowly. "Margaret never mentioned any of this," she said. I looked down at the paper coffee cup warming my hands. The coffee had gone cold nearly an hour earlier. "There never seemed to be a reason," I answered softly. Ryan stared at me in disbelief. "You taught doctors?" he asked. I nodded once. "A long time ago." "Then why would you leave all of that?" His voice carried frustration now. Confusion mixed with something sharper underneath. I could have answered him honestly right there in the hallway. I could have reminded him about the years after his father's accident. About hospital bills stacked on the kitchen counter. About sitting awake at 2 in the morning sewing loose buttons onto his school uniforms because we could not afford replacements. About the nights I reviewed medical journals after everyone slept, only to close them quietly before sunrise so breakfast could still be on the table by 7. But sacrifice sounds less heroic when spoken aloud. So I simply said, "Life changes." Dr. Hayes lowered his voice. "Your son deserves to know who you were." I gave him a tired smile. "Benjamin, after enough years pass, people stop asking." Ryan leaned back against the wall, running a hand across his face. "This cannot be real," he muttered. "You never talked like a doctor. You never acted like one." The sentence hurt more than he realized. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true. I had spent decades making myself smaller inside my own home. Smaller opinions. Smaller dreams. Smaller stories. Eventually the performance became invisible even to me. Noah's monitor suddenly steadied inside the room, the harsh, irregular beeping finally slowing into a calmer rhythm. A nurse smiled with visible relief as she adjusted the medication lying near his bed. Dr. Hayes exhaled quietly beside me. "The treatment is responding," he said. Ryan looked through the glass window at his son sleeping peacefully for the first time all evening. His shoulders lowered slightly. Then he turned back toward me again, but this time there was no irritation in his face. Only uncertainty. "Mom," he asked slowly, "what else do I not know about you?" I held his gaze for several seconds before answering. "More than you ever cared to ask." Ryan did not say much after that. He sat beside the window outside Noah's hospital room with his elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor while Claire scrolled nervously through her phone beside him. Every few minutes she glanced toward me like she wanted to ask something but could not figure out how. I remained near the coffee station at the end of the hallway, quietly folding the empty paper bag that had once held Noah's dinner. The hospital had grown quieter now. Evening rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking the parking garage, and somewhere down the corridor a television played an old sitcom too softly to understand. Dr. Hayes approached me again carrying 2 cups of fresh coffee. "You still take it black?" he asked with a faint smile. I accepted the cup carefully. "Some habits survive old age." He laughed under his breath before leaning against the wall beside me. "Do you remember what you told us during residency?" he asked. "You said medicine was not about proving how intelligent you were. It was about paying attention to the details everybody else ignored." I stared into the steam rising from the coffee. I was probably very dramatic back then. No, he replied quietly. You were brilliant. Ryan looked up at that word. Brilliant. I saw the exact moment it unsettled him. Children grow up believing their parents have always been exactly who they appear to be inside the home. Mothers become fixed objects in their memory. The woman who packs lunches. The woman who folds laundry. The woman who reminds you to wear a jacket when it is cold outside. They never stop to imagine the lives those women had before motherhood swallowed everything else. Ryan stood slowly and walked toward us. I still do not understand any of this, he admitted. You never even talked about college. I smiled faintly. That is because whenever I tried, you were usually too busy checking your phone. The honesty of the sentence made him lower his eyes immediately. Claire shifted awkwardly nearby. Margaret, she said carefully, why would somebody leave a career like that behind? I looked through the glass toward Noah sleeping peacefully beneath warm hospital blankets. Because sometimes life asks women to choose, I answered softly. And my family needed me more than the hospital did. Ryan frowned slightly. Dad never mentioned any of this either. Your father hated feeling like he interrupted my future, I said. After his construction accident, he could barely walk for almost a year. You were 6 years old. The insurance company delayed payments. The mortgage was late 3 months in a row. Something had to give. Ryan stared at me silently. I continued before I could stop myself. Boston offered me a department chair position that same month. Your father begged me not to decline it. Dr. Hayes shook his head slowly like he still could not believe it himself. You turned down one of the most prestigious appointments in the country, he said quietly. For your family? I shrugged lightly. At the time, it did not feel heroic. It felt necessary. Ryan leaned back against the wall, visibly overwhelmed now. All these years, he murmured, I thought you were just... He stopped himself before finishing the sentence, but he did not need to. Just ordinary. Just old-fashioned. Just a housewife. The words still lingered between us anyway. Noah suddenly stirred awake inside the room, his small hand reaching weakly toward the television remote beside the bed. Relief flooded Ryan's face instantly as he hurried inside. Claire followed after him, but before entering the room she paused beside me awkwardly. I did not know, she whispered. I nodded once. No, I said calmly. You did not. And standing there beneath those pale hospital lights, I realized something painful about silence. The longer you hide your sacrifices to protect the people you love, the easier it becomes for them to believe you were never capable of greatness at all. By midnight, the hospital hallway had grown almost silent except for the distant rolling of supply carts and the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Noah was finally stable enough to sleep without nurses rushing in every few minutes, and for the first time all evening Ryan looked exhausted instead of defensive. Claire had gone downstairs to buy coffee while Dr. Hayes reviewed updated charts at the nurse station. I sat quietly beside Noah's room with my coat folded across my lap, watching soft rain slide down the dark windows overlooking the parking lot. Ryan approached slowly and lowered himself into the chair beside me. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question I think he had been afraid to ask all night. Were you happy? I turned toward him slightly. What do you mean? He rubbed both hands together nervously. Giving everything up. Staying home. Taking care of me and Dad. Were you actually happy? The question settled somewhere deep inside me because it was honest. Not defensive. Not dismissive. Honest. I looked toward Noah sleeping peacefully beneath the blankets inside the room before answering. Some days I admitted quietly. Some days I was too tired to think about happiness at all. Ryan stared at the floor. I do not remember you ever talking about wanting more. I smiled faintly. That is because mothers from my generation were taught not to. He swallowed hard after hearing that. I could see memories moving behind his eyes now. Small moments he had probably never questioned before. The homemade Halloween costumes because money was tight after his father's surgeries. The nights I stayed awake helping with science projects while still waking up before sunrise to pack lunches. The parent-teacher conferences I attended alone because his father worked double shifts trying to recover financially. Sacrifice becomes invisible when children grow up surrounded by it every day. Eventually they stop seeing it at all. Claire returned carrying 3 paper coffee cups in a cardboard tray. She handed one carefully to me without meeting my eyes. "I got you decaf," she said softly. "I remembered that regular coffee keeps you awake." It was such a small detail, but the effort behind it surprised me. "Thank you," I replied. She sat beside Ryan quietly, smoothing the sleeve of her sweater over and over again. "Margaret," she finally said, "can I ask you something?" I nodded once. "Did you ever regret it?" Her voice trembled slightly now. "Leaving your career behind?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering honestly. "I regretted parts of it," I said softly. "I regretted how quickly people stopped seeing me as intelligent once I became a full-time mother. I regretted how easy it became for everyone to assume my world was small just because I spent most of it inside a home." Claire lowered her eyes immediately. Ryan leaned back heavily in his chair. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think I have spent years talking to you like you were less than me." The words hurt because they were true, but hearing him admit it somehow hurt even more. I folded my hands together calmly in my lap. "You talk to me the way the world trained you to," I answered. "People respect titles, salaries, offices with glass walls. They rarely respect the person quietly holding an entire family together behind the scenes." Dr. Hayes walked toward us again carrying Noah's latest test results, but before speaking he looked directly at Ryan. "Your mother saved your son tonight," he said calmly. "Do not spend another 20 years misunderstanding who she is." Ryan looked at me then with tears gathering quietly in his eyes, and for the first time since entering that hospital, I no longer felt invisible sitting beside my own child. The days after Noah returned home felt strangely fragile, like our family was learning how to speak to one another all over again. Ryan called me every evening now. At first the conversations were awkward and careful, filled with long pauses and quiet apologies hidden beneath ordinary questions about groceries or the weather. But slowly something softer began growing between us. One Thursday afternoon, Claire invited me to lunch at a small cafe near their neighborhood. It was the first time she had ever invited me anywhere without Ryan present. She looked nervous the entire drive there, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her sweater sleeves while soft country music played through the car speakers. The cafe smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon coffee cakes when we walked inside. Young mothers sat near the windows pushing strollers gently with one foot while college students typed on laptops beneath hanging yellow lights. Claire wrapped both hands around her coffee cup after we sat down. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. I stirred cream slowly into my tea but did not interrupt her. "Not just for the things I said recently," she continued. "For years." Her voice trembled slightly now. "I used to joke with my friends that you were old-fashioned. That you had wasted your potential by staying home." I looked out the cafe window at people hurrying along the sidewalk beneath bright autumn trees. "A lot of women believe that now," I said softly. Claire shook her head immediately. "No. I think I believed it because it made me feel superior." The honesty in that sentence surprised me. She lowered her eyes to the table. "My mother worked constantly when I was growing up. She was successful and respected and always exhausted. I promised myself I would never disappear into motherhood the way other women did." I nodded slowly because suddenly I understood her better than I ever had before. Fear often disguises itself as judgment. Claire had spent years afraid that sacrificing too much for family would erase her identity. So she looked down on women who chose it willingly. "There is nothing wrong with ambition," I told her gently. "The mistake is assuming women who make different choices are less intelligent than you." Tears gathered quietly in her eyes after that. "I treated you terribly," she whispered. "Especially after Harold died. I kept acting like your life revolved around helping us whenever we needed childcare or dinners or favors. I gave a faint, tired smile. It did revolve around family for a very long time. Claire looked down at her hands. Ryan found more boxes in your attic yesterday, she admitted carefully. He spent 3 hours reading your old lectures. I blinked in surprise. 3 hours? She laughed softly through her tears. He called himself an idiot at least 20 times. That evening Ryan arrived at my house carrying one of the old storage boxes beneath his arm. Noah followed behind him carrying grocery bags almost too heavy for his small hands. Mom, Ryan said quietly after setting the box onto the kitchen table. Dr. Hayes called me today. I looked up from arranging flowers in a glass vase near the sink. Oh? Ryan nodded slowly. The hospital wants to invite you to speak at their pediatric conference next month. I stared at him in complete silence. He smiled nervously. Apparently your old lectures are still required reading for some departments. I laughed softly under my breath because the idea felt almost unreal now. Another lifetime. Another woman. Ryan stepped closer then. You do not have to say yes, he added quickly. But I think maybe. He hesitated before finishing the sentence. I think maybe you stopped being seen because everyone around you got too comfortable being taken care of. The room grew quiet after that except for Noah humming softly while unpacking groceries near the refrigerator. I looked at my son standing there in my kitchen with regret written plainly across his face, and for the first time in many years, I realized healing does not always begin with grand gestures. Sometimes it begins the moment someone finally chooses to see you clearly. 3 weeks later, I stood outside the pediatric conference hall at St. Catherine Medical Center holding a visitor badge between trembling fingers. The building smelled exactly the way hospitals always do. Clean linen. Coffee. Antiseptic. Strange how certain places preserve old versions of yourself no matter how many years pass. Through the glass doors ahead of me, doctors and specialists moved between conference rooms carrying tablets and paper folders while quiet conversations echoed beneath bright chandeliers overhead. Ryan stood beside me adjusting the collar of his suit jacket nervously. You still have time to change your mind, he said gently. I looked down at the navy blue dress I almost did not wear that morning. The last time I had spoken at a medical conference, my hair had still been dark and Harold had kissed me goodbye in a hotel lobby before promising to save me a seat near the stage. That memory felt impossibly far away now. No, I answered softly. I think I spent too many years changing my mind about myself. Ryan smiled faintly after hearing that. Claire and Noah waited near the entrance holding paper cups of hot chocolate while Dr. Hayes greeted attendees farther down the hall. When he spotted me, his entire face brightened. Professor Whitmore, he called warmly. Everyone is excited to meet you. I laughed quietly under my breath. That sounds dangerous. But as we entered the conference hall together, something unexpected happened. Conversations began stopping one by one. A younger doctor near the registration table straightened immediately after hearing my name. Another whispered something to her colleague while looking toward me with wide eyes. Then slowly, almost unbelievably, several people stood up. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just quietly. Respectfully. Ryan looked around the room in stunned silence as more doctors approached to introduce themselves. Your pediatric neuromapping paper changed how I approached diagnostics during residency, one woman told me. Another smiled warmly and added, My professor used to quote your lectures constantly. I thanked them politely while trying to steady the strange ache building inside my chest. For years I had convinced myself that chapter of my life no longer mattered. Yet here stood complete strangers carrying pieces of work I thought had disappeared decades ago. Ryan remained unusually quiet throughout all of it. Finally he leaned closer and whispered, I do not think I have ever been this proud of anyone before. The sentence nearly broke me more than the insults ever had. Because all mothers want, deep down, is to be seen clearly by their children at least once before life ends. Later that afternoon, I stood behind the conference podium facing rows of doctors, students, and specialists beneath soft auditorium lighting. My hands no longer shook. I spoke about medicine first. About listening carefully. About paying attention to small details others overlook. But somewhere in the middle of the lecture, I found myself speaking about something else too. Sacrifice. Identity. The quiet ways women disappear inside their families while still holding those families together every single day. The room stayed completely silent while I spoke. When the lecture ended, the applause lasted much longer than I expected. As people slowly gathered their things afterward, Ryan approached the stage with tears standing openly in his eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "I spent years reducing you to the smallest version of yourself because it made me comfortable." I stepped down from the podium and touched his cheek gently the same way I used to when he was little. "No," I answered quietly. "You simply believed what the world teaches people to believe about women who give everything to their families." Ryan shook his head immediately. "Still," he whispered, "I should have looked closer." I smiled sadly because maybe that was the truest thing anyone had said all month. Families rarely notice the weight carried by the quietest person in the room until the day she finally sets it down.